The day began like any other. The hum of the coffee machine in the kitchen filled the quiet house, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. Alex was in his usual spot, standing by the counter, carefully packing their 6-year-old daughter Emily's lunch. He had a habit of including a little note in her lunchbox, a simple "I love you" with a smiley face. It was a small gesture, but one that made him feel connected to his family. Rachel, his wife of 10 years, sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. She hadn't been herself lately. Something about her felt distant, like she was physically present, but emotionally somewhere far away. Alex had noticed, but every time he tried to bring it up, she brushed him off with a tired smile. "You all right?" Alex asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Yeah," Rachel replied, not looking up from her phone. "Just tired." Alex sighed and walked over to her, placing a soft kiss on the top of her head. She smiled faintly but didn't meet his eyes. He noticed the tension in her shoulders and the way she seemed to avoid his touch more often these days. He chalked it up to stress. Being a stay-at-home mom could be draining, especially with Emily starting school this year. The house was quiet most days, and Rachel wasn't the type to handle solitude well. "I'll see you tonight," Alex said, grabbing his car keys. "Yeah," Rachel mumbled, still staring at her phone. The front door closed softly behind him, and Rachel finally exhaled, the weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. She glanced at her phone again, seeing a text from Jake. "Can't wait to see you today." Her heart raced. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself. There was something about Jake that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. He wasn't like Alex. Predictable, kind, safe. Jake was dangerous, exciting, and most importantly, not her husband. Rachel looked over at Emily, who was quietly playing with her toys in the living room. For a brief moment, the image of her family flashed before her eyes. Alex's loving face, Emily's innocent smile, and she felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly took her breath away. But then she thought of Jake, of his strong arms and the way he looked at her, like she was the only woman in the world. The guilt was quickly replaced. Later that morning, Rachel pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe near the gym where Jake worked. Her hands trembled as she texted him, "I'm here." Moments later, Jake strolled in, looking every bit the confident, charismatic man she had been drawn to. He was tall, muscular, and had a way of making her feel like she was the most important person in the room. When he smiled, it was infectious. "Hey, gorgeous," Jake said, sliding into the seat across from her. Rachel smiled, but it was tinged with nervousness. "Hey." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You okay? You seem on edge." "I'm fine," Rachel lied. "Just, you know, life." Jake chuckled softly. "Forget about life. I'm here now." His confidence and easygoing nature soothed her nerves. She let herself relax, even if it was just for a moment. Jake had a way of making everything else disappear. Alex, the house, the responsibilities. When she was with him, she could pretend that none of it existed. They talked for a while, though most of the conversation was flirtatious banter that made her laugh and forget herself. But as the minutes ticked by, Rachel began to feel the guilt creeping back in. She was here, sneaking around, while Alex was at work, and Emily was at school. She was lying to the people she loved most. "I should go," Rachel said, pulling her hand away. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "I can't stay long," she said, avoiding his gaze. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're scared, aren't you?" Rachel stiffened. "No, I'm not." Jake reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to be scared with me. No one has to know." She knew that. She knew no one had to know. But it was the possibility that they might find out that terrified her. She could lose everything. Her husband, her daughter, her home. "I really have to go," she said, standing up abruptly. Jake's expression softened, and he stood too, his hand gently catching hers. "All right. But you'll come back?" Rachel hesitated, her heart pounding. She wanted to say no, to end this before it got any worse. But the words didn't come. Instead, she nodded. "I'll see you soon," she whispered before turning and walking out of the cafe, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. Later that night, Alex came home late that evening, tired from a long day at work. Rachel had dinner ready as usual, and Emily was chattering away at the table about her day at school. Everything seemed normal, but beneath the surface, there was a tension that neither of them wanted to address. As they sat down for dinner, Alex looked across the table at Rachel. She was smiling, talking to Emily, but something in her eyes was distant, unreachable. "How was your day?" Alex asked, trying to reconnect with her. Rachel hesitated for a moment. "Good, just the usual. How about you?" "Busy," Alex said, "but nothing too crazy." They ate in silence for a few moments, the only sound being the clinking of silverware and Emily's soft humming. After dinner, when Emily had gone to bed, Alex and Rachel sat on the couch together. The television was on, but neither of them was really watching it. "I feel like we're drifting," Alex said suddenly, breaking the silence. Rachel froze, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Alex admitted. "It just feels like we're not as close as we used to be. You're distant. Is there something you're not telling me?" Rachel's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, to confess everything and beg for his forgiveness. But the fear of losing him, of breaking apart their family, was too great. "No," she lied. "There's nothing." Alex stared at her for a long moment, as if searching her face for something, some clue to explain the distance between them. But eventually he nodded, accepting her words. "Okay," he said softly. Rachel leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. But even in that moment of closeness, she felt 1,000 miles away. The affair deepens. Over the next few weeks, Rachel continued seeing Jake in secret. The guilt ebbed and flowed, but every time she was with him, it felt worth the risk. He made her feel alive, like she was more than just a wife and mother. With Jake, she was someone else entirely, someone free. But the weight of her lies was beginning to take its toll. She was growing more anxious, more paranoid. She began to suspect that Alex was noticing the changes in her behavior. He started asking more questions, his concern growing. One night, after another secret meeting with Jake, Rachel came home to find Alex sitting at the kitchen table, his face pale and tense. "I know," he said quietly, his voice strained. Rachel's heart dropped into her stomach. "What?" "I know you've been seeing someone," Alex said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I found the messages on your phone." The room was deathly silent, and all Rachel could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had been caught. There was no way out now. Tears filled her eyes, and she struggled to find the words to explain, to apologize, to make it all go away. "Alex, But he shook his head, his eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. "Don't. Just don't." Rachel's entire world crumbled around her as she realized what she had done and what she was about to lose. The story concludes with the unraveling of Rachel and Alex's marriage. They try to work through the pain, but the trust has been shattered. The final scenes show Rachel sitting alone in the quiet house, realizing the price she paid for